I've left the care of Dad to you. In the morning he was supposedly heading for a business trip. I could feel joy radiating from Simon's entire being. Everything was going his way, and he was utterly convinced he had deceived me. From the end of Simon's sentences, I could sense the mockery directed at me. It had already been months since I discovered Simon's affair. Today, under the guise of a business trip abroad, he's actually going on a vacation with his mistress. Once the trip is over, Simon will surely bring up divorce. Despite having proof of Simon's affair, I felt powerless. What was the meaning of my life up to this point? Despite my earnest efforts, this outcome is just too much. I was troubled, but on the night Simon left for his trip, my father-in-law seemed to have made up his mind and told me, "We're selling the house immediately." My father-in-law's suggestion was too abrupt, leaving me unable to hide my confusion.
"What do you mean? If we sell the house, we will."
To my bewildered self, my father-in-law smiled kindly. "My name is Mina. A 41-year-old housewife. I haven't worked at all during the 20 years I've been married to Simon. I did become the bride I dreamed of as a child, but reality hasn't turned out as smoothly as I had imagined when I was younger. After graduating high school, I found a job at a local bank, where I met Simon. To me, who had just graduated from high school and was still a child, Simon appeared very adult-like and attractive. He would casually cover for my mistakes and gently teach me various things, and I found myself increasingly drawn to him. Simon, knowing of my affection for him, didn't seem to mind, and we naturally started dating. A few years into our relationship, Simon proposed to me, and we decided to get married. However, perhaps due to the social climate at the time, Simon preferred that I didn't continue working. My in-laws said they would prioritize my wishes, but at the time, I thought this was the natural course of things. Once we were married, I found the job of a housewife more challenging than I had anticipated. My mother-in-law, though strict, taught me various things with love, and I had a good relationship with my father-in-law. The biggest change after getting married was Simon's personality. Despite having grown up seeing his parents' harmonious relationship, Simon became domineering, always trying to assert his superiority over me.
"Do you realize you can be a stay-at-home wife thanks to me?"
Simon would often say this, as if it were some sort of hint that he was trying to control me as his possession. My in-laws, noticing Simon scolding me in secret, would always take my side. We couldn't have children, and there were times when I felt responsible, but my in-laws never blamed me.
"How long are you going to hold on to such outdated ideas? You should be grateful to Mina."
Every time he was admonished, Simon would sulk and not speak to anyone for a while. His behavior was childish, and since getting married, I've only grown to think less of Simon. This situation continued for over 10 years, but thanks to my in-laws, I managed to get through each day. But about 5 years ago, my worst fears were realized. My mother-in-law fell ill and passed away. She had been a source of support in place of my distant biological parents. Losing my mother-in-law was a huge shock to me. But the shock was even greater for my father-in-law, who had lost the wife he loved so much. His grief was incomparable to mine. Shortly after my mother-in-law's death, my father-in-law became mentally unwell. He was depressed. He was capable of communication, but things could not go on as before. With no knowledge on how to proceed, I was deeply troubled. Despite this, Simon remained unchanged, insisting that as his wife, it was my responsibility to take care of the household. Given my father-in-law's age, the doctors recommended living in a facility where he could receive proper treatment more comfortably than what I could provide on my own. However, I was reluctant to send my grieving father-in-law to a facility. I thought Simon would surely help with his own father's care. So, I decided to take care of my father-in-law at home. At first, being overwhelmed by the term depression, I handled my father-in-law as if he were fragile. He sometimes seems to forget even eating or sleeping while lost in thought, but my father-in-law's treatment towards me didn't change particularly. He continued to care for me as before, often expressing his gratitude. I could feel that his emotions had become less vibrant than before, but his feelings for me were clearly conveyed. Instead of supporting such a father-in-law, Simon began to spew terrible words at him. "Mom's gone, and you've become completely useless.
Don't you feel ashamed of yourself for that?"
Despite not helping at all with his father's treatment, Simon treated him as if he were incompetent and seemed to enjoy it. Was this his way of taking revenge for all the nagging he had received before? Simon's childish behavior and words were disheartening. But even when I warned him to stop the verbal abuse towards my father-in-law, he would only get angrier, telling me to shut up. My father-in-law, concerned about me, seemed never to have a moment's peace. I can't replace his wife, but now, I'm all he has. Feeling disheartened, I steeled myself, deciding to persevere until my father-in-law's condition fully recovered. While I was dedicating my efforts to caring for my father-in-law, Simon was thoroughly enjoying himself. Now that the nagging from his parents was gone, nobody was there to reprimand him. He started coming home later, claiming overtime on weekdays, seemingly forgetting all about his father. Could he really think he's fooling me with such flimsy lies? My father-in-law seemed concerned about Simon's behavior but couldn't confront him due to his illness. However, suddenly, Simon claimed he had something to discuss with my father-in-law and me.
I've been having to work late more often, and there are days I can't come home. I've left Dad all to you.
Simon strung together a transparently false narrative, glancing back and forth between us.
I'm worried about leaving the two of you in this old house. So, I'm thinking of rebuilding the house.
Simon's sudden proposal left my father-in-law and me in shock. However, I knew that if I opposed this idea, Simon wouldn't stop.
There's money left by Mom, right? Let's use that to build a house for us. It's for everyone to live safely and happily.
Desperately convincing my father-in-law, who was dulled by his illness, Simon successfully managed to use the money left by my mother-in-law and my father-in-law's savings. Something felt off. I couldn't help but think so. He hadn't cared about my father-in-law and me before, so why suddenly want to rebuild the house because he's worried about us? There must be an ulterior motive behind Simon's plan. My father-in-law agreed to build the house because Simon said he was worried about Mina. Feeling sorry for my father-in-law, I decided to uncover whatever Simon was hiding. Soon after, our house was demolished to be rebuilt. Now, we live in a temporary place that Simon rented nearby. Even with the change of residence, Simon's overtime continued, and he came home even less frequently than before. My father-in-law's condition remained the same, but it seemed to be improving slightly. At least, he had recovered enough that I could leave him alone for short periods with peace of mind. One night, after making sure my father-in-law had fallen asleep, I left the house. I was going to check on Simon's overtime. Arriving at Simon's company, I checked the time on my watch. It was 9:15 p.m. Just as I suspected, looking from the outside, all the lights in the company were off. There's no way he could be working overtime under these circumstances. Could today have been an exception, and he managed to come home early? If so, by the time I get back home, Simon should be there too. Convinced that it couldn't be, I hurried back home. Upon returning, as expected, Simon was nowhere to be found. The next morning, around 8 a.m., I received a message from Simon as usual.
I stayed at the company last night, so I'll go straight to work without coming home.
It's a lie. If I had visited the office yesterday and he was already asleep by then, that would be odd. If work ended at such an hour, he should be able to come home. There's only one answer these circumstances point to. Simon is having an affair. No matter how much I try to think positively, it's too suspicious. I hardly have any affection left for Simon. Knowing about the affair, strangely, the shock is small. But I can't stand being exploited. Dumping the care of his father on me, and brazenly saying he's rebuilding the house for Mina's sake, I can't stand his audacity. It's just like Simon. He probably plans to rebuild the house with his parents' money and live there with his lover. Once the house is rebuilt, it's almost certain he'll try to get rid of me and his father. He undoubtedly doesn't realize I'm onto the affair, and I wonder if he plans to cite our differences as a reason for divorce. He's probably planning to strip money from his father and put him in a cheap facility. I'm not sure when the affair started, but it's probably been a long time. The fact he's thinking about living together after building a new house says a lot. This is just my hunch, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. My gut is telling me so. But confronting Simon now would just lead him to wiggle his way out. To tie everything together, I need to gather evidence without him noticing. Convinced of Simon's infidelity, I started an investigation. Simon usually finishes work at 6 p.m. Claiming I forgot to buy something for his father, I left the house. Preparing for the investigation, I also made preparations for his father's sake. If he were to leave the house, anything could happen. So, I installed a sensor at the entrance that would alert my smartphone if he tried to leave. I've hidden anything dangerous in the house from his father's sight, so he shouldn't be in any danger. Though I can't leave the house for long, it's better than taking no precautions at all. I hurried to Simon's office and waited in hiding for him to come out. At 6:10 p.m. As people began to trickle out of the entrance, Simon appeared. So much for working late. He's among the first to leave the office. Simon, without a care for his surroundings, hurried toward the direction of the station. I adjusted my hat to cover my face more and followed him. Arriving at the station, it was disappointingly easy to catch Simon in the act. He headed straight for a woman dressed in a flashy coat, probably having arranged to meet her there. She seemed much younger than us, likely in her early 20s. I don't know where he met such a young woman, but it's pathetic of Simon to be infatuated with her. Noticing Simon approaching, the woman waved and jumped into his arms. This confirmed it. I quickly launched the camera app on my smartphone and captured the moment. The thought of following them further made me nauseous, but I continued. Laughably predictable, they entered a hotel hand in hand. Suppressing my discomfort, I captured the scene again with my smartphone. This should be enough evidence. No matter how Simon tries to act from here on out, these photos will be my trump card. I rushed back home to the waiting presence of his father and we had dinner as if nothing happened. No matter how things turn out, Simon and I are headed for divorce. What will become of his father then? Eating the dinner I made, he said it was delicious, and my heart ached unbearably. Exposing Simon's affair, am I betraying his father who has always helped me? Will my accusations endanger his father's position? Since then, I've continued to ponder his father's future, but no answer has come. For both his father and myself to live better. That's all I can hope for now. Months have passed since I uncovered Simon's affair, which continues unabated. Of course, he has no idea that I'm aware of it. Finally, the new house is nearing completion, and I anticipated Simon would make a move soon. My suspicions were confirmed when one day Simon told me he was going on a business trip overseas. This is it. Probably, he intends it to be a honeymoon with his lover. Lying about a business trip, proposing on this trip as a substitute for a honeymoon, and starting a new life in the newly built house. And after returning from abroad, he will likely kick out me and his father. We don't have much time left. I've left the care of Dad to you. In the morning he was supposedly heading for a business trip. I could feel joy radiating from Simon's entire being. Everything was going his way, and he was utterly convinced he had deceived me. From the end of Simon's sentences, I could sense the mockery directed at me. The night Simon left for his business trip, I decided to tell his father everything. This action might worsen his father's condition. But I can't wait any longer. Along with the photos of Simon's affair, I shared all my thoughts with his father. When Simon returns, he will likely bring up divorce, and his father will be put in a facility. His father quietly waited for me to finish talking, then pondered for a while. Could you wait a moment? After saying this to me, his father went into his room. Did my words upset him? Or did they shock him further, worsening his condition? I questioned whether my actions were right and waited there. Soon after, his father returned. In his hands were a cell phone and some piece of paper. Sitting down in front of me again, he then made a call. Hello, I am the father of Simon, who is under your employment. Is Simon available? His father was calling Simon's workplace. After a brief exchange, his father ended the conversation. I am now certain. Simon has taken a week off. It's not a business trip. Putting down the phone, his father sighed deeply and apologized to me. I never doubted you, Mina. But for what I'm about to do, I need to be sure. I'm truly sorry for what my son has caused. His father apologized repeatedly. Then, he took out a thick envelope filled with documents from a shelf in the living room. It was the envelope containing the contract documents for the new house. We're selling the house immediately. His father muttered while looking at the contract for the new house inside the envelope. It was more like he was convincing himself rather than telling me. It took me a moment to grasp the meaning of his words. Something I had never imagined was about to happen. I could only nod, accepting his father's resolve. In a heavy atmosphere, his father began to explain. A week passed, and Simon returned home. Maintaining the pretense of having gone for work, he exaggerated his fatigue. Surely, he was smug inside, believing he had deceived us. But we were on the same page. Simon believed he was close to moving into the new house and was waiting for the right moment to bring up divorce. He didn't say anything that day, but the next day, after the usual time he returns from work had passed, he came home and started the conversation. Putting on a grave face and sighing repeatedly, he began.
I've been thinking for a while, and with trips like this one, it looks like they're going to increase.
Just as expected, he intended to use work as a reason for divorce.
It's going to be just you taking care of Dad from now on. With all the overtime and us growing apart, it's like we're not even a couple anymore. I think it's best for both of us to get a divorce.
Eager to start a new life with his lover, Simon was quick to conclude. I covered my mouth in exaggerated shock, pretending to ponder for a while. After giving it enough time, I finally spoke up.
What does your dad say? I haven't told Dad yet, but I plan to manage with a visiting helper.
Continuing to play the shocked wife, I accepted Simon's proposal, saying, if this is for the best for both of us. Conveniently, Simon had already prepared the divorce papers, presenting the document with his signature on it to me. I was speechless in disbelief. Tears nearly spilled for a different reason as I signed the divorce papers. I'll submit this tomorrow. Simon nodded contentedly upon receiving the divorce papers, unaware of the worst scenario about to unfold for him.
You can stay here a bit longer until you're ready to leave. I'll talk to Dad.
Thus, as my father-in-law and I had anticipated, the divorce with Simon was settled. A few days later,
Dad!
Simon returned home with a pale face after checking on the new house.
My house is gone! The house that was supposed to be finished is now just an empty lot.
Hearing Simon's panicked voice, his father appeared from the back room.
Is there a problem? I asked for it to be done.
His father answered with a feigned innocent face. Hearing his father's words, Simon rushed to him, shaking him.
Dad! What have you done? It's the illness. You're not in your right mind because of the illness, right? They'll rebuild it if we explain, won't they?
Trying to calm himself down, Simon muttered to himself with a pale face.
There's no need for that. That house was built by me, and I did it all on my own decision. Now that you and Mina are divorced, we don't need that house, do we?
His father remained nonchalant, throwing these words at Simon. Simon, in disbelief, muttered it's a lie, frantically pulling out his smartphone, unsure of what to do next. Then, Simon's phone rang.
Sorry, there's a bit of trouble. You might be at the wrong place? Don't worry, I'm on my way.
Simon hurriedly ended the call and dashed out of the house. My father-in-law and I exchanged glances and followed him. Simon was surely heading to where the new house had been. The moment of truth was approaching. When we arrived a bit after Simon, as expected, his lover was there.
Hey, what's going on? Explain it to me in a way that I can understand.
His lover, Anna, still in her flashy attire, was confronting Simon. Unaware of our arrival, Simon was desperately trying to pacify Anna.
There's a deep reason for this. I'm not lying. Believe me.
Simon pleaded desperately with a pathetic voice. Anna must have been told by Simon that he built the house for them. She felt deceived. After all, their relationship wasn't genuine, they were just using each other. Now that the supposed benefit of a new house for Anna was gone, this outcome was only natural.
It was all a lie about the divorce too, right? Enough. Who would want to be with an old man like you?
Anna slapped Simon's cheek, crying, and left with the sound of her heels clacking away.
Anna!
Simon tried to follow her, but stopped at his father's shout.
Simon! Enough!
His father's voice, rarely raised, echoed through the area. Simon turned back and collapsed on the spot. Though his father's illness wasn't completely cured, his eyes showed a firm resolve, unmistakably scolding his son. Simon, abandoned by his promised wife and having lost his father's trust, was finally hit by reality. Did Anna not love me? Was everything known to Dad and Mina? So the divorce was because of the affair. Where will I live if there's no house? Simon's inner turmoil seemed almost audible. Unable to stand up, he cried. His own questions stirring his mind further. His father looked at him with a cold gaze and said quietly,
This is the result of your own actions. Accept it.
With that, his father turned his back and began to walk away. Poor man.
But it's what you deserve. After mocking your suffering father and me, who would help you now? Goodbye.
Ignoring Simon's plea for help, I hurried to follow his father. Simon's cries lingered behind us. Weeks later, we received a call at my father-in-law's house. It was from a nearby hospital, saying Simon had been found in a local park and was admitted. Without a wallet, he had nothing to eat and was in a dangerous condition. A neighbor found him collapsed in the park and called an ambulance. It was fortunate he was found early. His father repeatedly apologized and expressed gratitude over the phone. Saying we needed to go to the hospital for paperwork, I offered to accompany him. His father said, "It's not your concern anymore, I'm sorry, but I felt guilty leaving it all to him." Upon arriving at the hospital and visiting Simon's room, we found him emaciated on the bed. His hair was disheveled, and his beard was overgrown. When he noticed us, he muttered something in a low voice, but we couldn't make it out.
Causing trouble for others again.
With these words from his father, Simon cried again. It seemed that, over these few weeks, he had finally come to terms with his situation. After a while, the attending physician came to the room, and my father-in-law and I were taken to another room. There, we were explained Simon's condition, the hospitalization procedures, and the plans for the future. It appeared that cold-induced debilitation and malnutrition were the main causes of his collapse, and he would be fine to be discharged in a few days. However, the recent shock had also caused significant emotional damage. Simon had developed the same depression as his father. From the state we had seen Simon in earlier, one could vaguely imagine, but the price Simon had to pay was too steep. Afterwards, his father returned to the room, talked with Simon briefly, then called me over.
Shall we go home?
I nodded silently, and we began our journey back. Seeing his son in such a pitiful state, his father seemed a bit depressed after returning home. Although we both knew we needed to discuss the future, understanding each other's feelings made it hard to broach the subject. Unable to stand the heavy atmosphere, I brewed some coffee and offered it to his father.
Let's talk about the future after taking some rest,
I said cheerfully while serving the coffee. Hearing this, his father thanked me lightly and nodded. We both had to endure such painful experiences. I truly resented Simon. The next day, having regained a bit of composure, my father-in-law and I needed to discuss what comes next anew. Regarding his father's health, it was improving more than I had expected. It's all thanks to you, his father said. While I could never replace his wife, it seems I was able to alleviate his loneliness somewhat.
So, as Simon had planned, I'm thinking of moving into a facility. A very nice one,
his father said with a smile, adding that at the end, he wanted a place where he could find companionship and conversation partners to spend his remaining years. When his father showed me the brochure, it was clear it was a very comfortable and impressive facility.
Are you worried about the cost?
His father seemed to read my mind, asking me this.
Did you not wonder why the land sold so quickly after I said we were selling the house, turning into an empty lot?
Indeed, that made sense. From the sale of the land to our old house becoming an empty lot, it happened in just a few days.
Actually, a major supermarket chain had been wanting that land for a long time.
Hearing this, I understood. The location was perfect for a store, bustling with people. It's understandable why they would pay a high price for that land. That's why it became an empty lot so quickly. With the sale of the land, his father had secured enough funds to comfortably live out his retirement. However, he had no intention of sharing that money with Simon.
He committed an unforgivable betrayal against you, Mina. So, he must continue to work to pay for his sin while battling his illness. But, he won't be able to work for a while.
His father then formally handed me a document.
I've settled things with Simon. Consider this an alimony payment, please accept it.
The document stated that his father would temporarily cover the alimony payments on behalf of Simon.
Even so, this much.
Seeing my troubled face, his father smiled.
This is from your mother-in-law and me. It's the least we can do for all the help you've given us, please accept it.
His father repeatedly emphasized how my support had contributed to his recovery from depression. I decided to graciously accept his father's sentiments.
Simon has caused you unbearable pain, but you will always be like a daughter to me. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to contact me.
Thus, I left the place where I had lived with his father. Months later, I bought a spacious condo, large enough for me to live alone. With the money I received from his father. Suddenly having so much freedom, I felt restless. Since then, his father has kept in touch, updating me on Simon's situation. The company learned about Simon's infidelity, causing our divorce and his subsequent depression, leading to his resignation. Since being discharged, he's rented a rundown place, struggling with his illness while continuing with day labor. Without anyone to help, he faces everything alone daily. Literally, Simon had lost everything. Considering the humiliation I endured, it felt like just deserts. He'll continue to work to pay alimony, bearing the guilt for life. On the other hand, his father's condition has further improved since then. Having companions around probably brightened his spirits. I've come to view Simon and his father separately, so this news was genuinely pleasing. Our relationship might seem a bit unusual to outsiders, but I plan to keep an eye on his father going forward. Having secured sufficient savings, I started focusing on my hobbies. The recipes I posted on social media, especially those old dishes taught by my mother-in-law that I've tweaked, gained popularity among many homemakers. This success led to the publication of several recipe books, enriching my life even more. I haven't felt lonely since the divorce, but recently, I've begun to feel more positive about love. I've started to feel attracted to a man who helped publish my recipe books. Of course, given my past, I'm being very cautious, but I think that's okay. There's no need to rush, I can move at my own pace. No matter the age, it's possible to start new things, even fall in love. Looking back, I often suppressed my feelings. Putting others first led me to neglect myself. I've decided to stop living that way and, from now on, live for myself above all.